Good afternoon, welcome. Today I'm going to discuss in QuickBooks Online accounting for vendors and the associated compliance for reporting of 1099s to the IRS or payments to the IRS. I'm going to focus on the general rule and set aside the exceptions to the rule so we can cover the best amount of accounting to get the better result as of focusing on the exception. So with that, I'm going to start in the new vendor area over here. And if I were setting up a new vendor and I was wondering if I needed to account for them for a 1099, that is payments to them throughout a calendar year to the IRS, I need some basic information from them. I need to know their name if they're an individual or the company name. So sometimes companies only act in their own name for filing for taxes, and they operate as a DBA. So it's important from that perspective. Even in corporations, they can have a differing a holding corporation and then a differing name as a doing business as. So static information is pretty straightforward. I just want to focus on, I need to know what any vendor's tax ID number is. Often that is the Social Security number, but more often than not, it's their business identification number that's on file with the IRS. And I'm going to need to get it and a process with the IRS forms to determine whether or not I'm ticking this box. I would only write vendor checks when I've got that sorted out. Possibly in the largest of corporations, which would not be subject to it because they're corporations, and we'll cover that a little bit later. You may just want to set them up and start writing checks. So we're just going to kind of pop out to the IRS site, which is irs.gov. And on the IRS.gov site, I've actually brought up a W-9, and this is the informational form that you're going to request. You're allowed to request it. It's a law from any business that you or individual that you're writing trade or business checks to. And in this information, it's just like that vendor information. I'm going to have a name, and if it's a differing business, I'm going to have their business name. And they need to tell me what kind of business they are. And then we're going to go back and take a look at a different section of the IRS site that's telling me, do individuals get one? Do corporations, S corps, partnerships? And we're going to not work heavily on the exemptions and the exceptions to the rule, just who generally gets it. They need to provide that Social Security number or employer identification number. Not every business has an employer identification number. What the IRS does do when you eventually do the filing requirement is match up the name and the Social Security number, or the business name, and the federal ID number. And there's minimal penalties. There are penalties if that's not provided or someone gives you misinformation for it. Most important part, someone needs to sign the form. Someone of authority in the corporation sign the form, verifying that they're telling you the truth. You get this form, you just hold on to it. And then you populate that information that now you're tracking payments, and that's their ID number. I'm going to close out of QuickBooks here just for a second and then go back to the IRS site. And well, who gets one? Now that I've got that information, who gets one? 1099 MISC. If you just search on 1099 MISC, which is the federal form for reporting people who get these miscellaneous payments, you'll see that there's an instruction sheet. There's a current instruction sheet. I think each and every year the rules do change year to year. You should generally use the IRS site, and even when ordering forms, you can order them from directly from the IRS if you're not using electronic service, or you can order them from any legitimate software vendor you choose. But this is the instruction, so I always just I don't go to a secondary site unless I'm confused and I need interpretation. I generally use the IRS site for most of my questions at this point. But there's just a couple of highlighted sections of the who gets one, And the threshold, I think the highlights besides the small $10 is who gets one. Most any trade in business that's not incorporated and it gets over $600 is going to end up needing some tracking for it. And it goes on to say a list of these people, but generally anything over $600 is going to get it. Reiteration that trade and business reporting only, not personal reporting, and non-for-profits is a highlight. Non-for-profits are considered trade or business and is subject to getting and issuing, in fact, 1099s. And the instructions continue on with exceptions to the rules, what kind of 1099 it is. But for purposes of what we're doing, the next general rule is corporations generally do not get them. And I'm going to just back up here a second. S corps, C corps, LLC. So I'm breaking my own rule, but some payments do not have to be reported, and the big exception is corporations generally and merchandise. So there are some exceptions. So that's why you need to have the W-9 filled out. They would not. So Blue Cross Blue Shield, which is large here, there's reporting requirements, but they're a big corporation. Okay, so I'm back in vendor reporting. A couple of things, and I'm going to actually move over to the process 1099 area in QuickBooks. In the process 1099 area, as you do a step-by-step process, actually produce your 1099s, you can see you might want to look for vendors that have not been marked with a 1099 that get over the threshold. And this is a check for you. And that's a personal expense, and that's a city expense. So knowing that, there's not a need to issue them a 1099. In QuickBooks, there's an area where you can review your payments and see them listed out, so you can catch where you may not have flagged a vendor for a 1099. And in that area, I could actually look at vendors not marked for 1099. I apply it, and I'll have the opportunity when processing to return to the vendor screen and turn on that tick box for 1099 tracking. Another quick check for making sure you're fully accounting for anyone who reaches the threshold or has received payments is to run an expenses by vendor summary report on the cash basis. And this allows a review of the entire year. This was done by totals. I've sorted it low to high to look for vendors that are assigned to payments. I hope I said that cleanly. So if I know someone hasn't reached the threshold, and the threshold 600, it begins to reach the threshold at this point, and this would show up on the other QuickBooks reporting in 1099 because Stu Leonard's is over the threshold. But what I'm really trying to analyze for, and you could do this a number of ways, is for the unspecified. And this particular sample company has, let's go in and take a look at what that number looks like. It has business expenses. These are property expenses. And here's a sample of it if I just drill into it. A vendor hasn't been assigned to this. So because a vendor hasn't been assigned, see a little name column there. Actually dig in one more level. As that vendor hasn't been assigned, if I didn't choose a payee, it's not going to know for that reason alone to assign for 1099. So I'd like that feature somehow as a feature in the software added. It may be in there. I'm not aware of it yet. But often people just enter through their register or download and don't assign the payee in online QuickBooks. So when you're going through a year-end process, there's a number of ways, that just being one of them, that you want to make sure anything material significant is getting assigned to payee. Another stopgap to that is only issue checks through paying a bill from a vendor. Always enter a vendor and then pay the bill. So if you enter a check, you need to be assigning the payee. Last but equally as important point is when accounting in QuickBooks Online and you're going through the processing screen of 1099s and 1099 categories, you're allowed to pick through your chart of accounts, if excluding other chart of accounts, in determining what is going to show up on the 1099. And there are reasons, there's not a lot of reasons, but there are reasons and exceptions as to why you might want to do this. An example would be that you're keeping your personal books and using the same vendor, and that's actually not part of the trade or business, would be a reason. So you actually have a section here that you're going to be able to accomplish that with. And as you dig more into the rules, accounting for proceeds for attorneys, if someone is an attorney and their vendor's assigned to that, it's going to help route proceeds to attorneys from that account. I appreciate everyone listening today. Thank you very much.